I am really pleased to be here today, and it's lovely for us all to get together and have a think and a discussion about what it means to be an ally, what it means to be a vegan, what it means to be an ally, especially to animals, which Nick Taylor will be talking some more about. In terms of the project, there were many ideas about this. What we wanted to centre on some sort of project that could allow vegans to express their personal experiences, but also how their personal experiences connect to politics. Because for some people, being vegan can be more stigmatised than many other identities, and that's a very interesting sort of proposition for many people contemplating becoming vegan. Is how will others react towards me? Will they be hostile? So we wanted to challenge some of these ideas and expose some of those hostilities, but also break down some of the stereotypes. So the project started, and we, as you'll see, have had some great students involved in this project. There's social work and human service students that have become involved. Kayla, who's doing her master's, is doing another vegan project relating to parenting and health professionals. So there's many sort of sub-projects going on around veganism, which has been wonderful. If you could go to the next slide, please, Naomi. So what you'll see is that there's, we needed to go through ethics, of course, and we had to identify some of the possible sensitivities that might have emerged when we were contacting people. The project itself was really designed to be visually interactive, as well as based on words and written stories. So what we were asking is for people to submit maybe 5 photographs and some little accompanying blurbs of their experiences. The photos you'll see in this presentation are all from the project, and we really thank the participants for their contribution. What we've done is had to snip out some of the aspects of the people to align with ethics expectations. It's not because we're not interested in revealing the person. In terms of it was a qualitative project, intersectional in orientation, which means that we're interested in class and gender and species and other axes of privilege and oppression. The research aims are there. You can run your eye over those research aims. We were exploring the social dimensions of health, wanting to visually represent how people who identify as vegan see themselves and take pride in what they're doing. I talked about the hostility, the potential for public derision, and how that public derision or just that kind of potential shunning or being put down can impact on vegans' emotional, psychological and social health. Next slide, please, Naomi. In terms of our analysis, we did, this was a project that we introduced students to coding. So it was a very simple kind of coding arrangement. What we did was using highlighters from the on the Word document. So different colours. Blue represented anything relating to the love of animals, stories about animals as they related to veganism. Yellow represented mostly vegan food and consumption. Green was about positive interactions about veganism and vegan allies. Red represented hostility or any kind of challenge or conflicts. And pink represented turning points or political analyses that weren't classified above. So there were 2 areas of allyship that we're really interested in, and that's being allies to animals and being allies to both each other as vegans and from non-vegans to people who are practicing veganism. So they're the questions that we had, and we're now going to move through some of the examples that have come directly from the projects. We've de-identified the participants in terms of their names, and their beautiful animals are showing in many of the slides, so I hope you enjoy it. I'll hand it over to Nick.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Hello, everybody. I'm just going to talk briefly about our first kind of overarching theme, which is the idea of vegans being allies to animals, which came out of the data and that I got to analyse, largely because I tend to focus more on animals than humans, so I tend to see these things more clearly. I don't mean more clearly than you, Heather. I mean more clearly than I see the human stuff. So we found a lot of questions here that we didn't always get the answers to. So there were some interesting questions around, you know, what does it mean to be an ally across species? What does it mean to be an ally with another being who can't talk, who can't tell you about their needs or about their oppression? But despite the kind of difficulties of navigating these kind of alliances and allyship across species, it became really clear that the people who submitted photos, that they were very clear that they were allies to non-human animals. And so some of the ways that this allyship manifest was love or affection for animals. As you can see here from this quote, a lot of people were involved in some form of animal rescue. And that may be with companion animals, but it also was with other species. We had people who'd rescued a lot of birds, some pigs. And this sense of love came across really strongly. And the idea that love represents compassion and that it represents connection, and that there was this kind of circular argument that people were making that you can't pull one of the three apart from that. Those three are very much connected. I'll move through some of these before I pick up on others. So, and it wasn't always with the kind of animals that we would necessarily live in close proximity with, as in would live in our houses with. A lot of our participants pulled out their relationships or connection with a broader sense of nature through what we would know as wild living or free living animals. And here's an example, knowing the idea of outdoor animals as individuals, squirrels and rabbits, often in fact animals that are considered to be pest species by other people and by governments who murder them ad nauseum. So this idea of cross-species love and affection is not limited to those animals that we think we have a reciprocal relationship with. It can be simply linked to this kind of reverence for the idea of other life. All right, next slide. Thanks, Naomi. Often our participants talked about how cross-species relationships were a turning point for their awareness around vegan ethics. How they could no longer see differences between the animals that it's considered normal in our societies to kill and eat, and the animals that they were sharing their home with. And very often this was kind of a catalytic moment for people, where they started to realise the sentience, the individuality of these other animals, and they felt a connection with them, possibly love, possibly empathy. They certainly individualised them, as you can see here with Edith, who has a name. And this was very much a turning point for them. All right, what else have we got? And this form of allyship often turned to advocacy. So a lot of the people who submitted to the project called themselves advocates for animals in one way or another. And this advocacy was really quite broad. So some of the advocacy could be taking in an animal that needed help. We had stories of a lot of failed fosters, people who would foster animals from shelters and then would fall madly in love with them in their own terms. We have one person described her first dog love, which I thought was a beautiful phrase. And then the foster would fail, and they would stay home with them. So really what we were seeing in terms of these kind of vegan allies to other animals was firstly that it's about love, compassion and connection. That often the disconnect that they felt living in a Calnist society, which Heather will touch on next, a balm to that was their relationship with other species, which helped them feel reconnected and helped remind them that what they were doing for what they considered to be the right reasons. And we also saw people doing extraordinary things for their animals because of the love and connection that they had. So things like moving house because their animal didn't like a particular area. Things like cooking fresh meals daily, sourcing holidays where their animals could go with them, planning holidays where they could volunteer at overseas animal shelters. You know, people's allyship with other animals was extremely manifest and extremely caring. And the final note I'll finish on is that it wasn't completely straightforward for them either. A lot of people, a lot of participants talked about the conflict and complicity that they felt in keeping companion animals, in having pets. First of all, just in the idea of having a pet and the kind of relations of dominance that includes, but also particularly around feeding them and around whether they had the choice to take meat away from these animals. And if they were going to feed them meat, then the complicity of their own speciesism was really tough for a lot of people who didn't resolve it, by the way. I have a longer list. I'll leave it there and switch back to Heather.
Well, thanks. That was really interesting. And I really, when we first got the data, we weren't as clear, obviously, as what we are now of what to make of it. And the idea of love and compassion and connection and empathy, they are really crucial. And, you know, I speak from social work and Nick's from human services, and most of the people here are in social work or public health. And that, you know, those ideas of connection and compassion are really crucial. So if we move to the next slide, please, Naomi. Many of our human-to-human examples of allyship were related to food and sharing food and other forms of consumption, but particularly food. And what you'll see is there are various stories. This is a lovely story. I'll just read it to you. Billy. After I retired, I took a part-time job at a lovely local establishment, a vegetarian, vegan, organic cafe. I learned how easy it is to be vegan. I learned how delicious vegan food could be. The photo is of the vegan forage crepe, probably pronounced that wrong, sorry. Vegan crepe batter, house-made vegan mushroom compote, house-made vegan pesto, a cashew cream, tomatoes and greens. The taste and texture is amazing. My omnivore friends even love it. And the last line is very interesting because there's often there's a turn in a vegan tale about food, about persuading people that vegan food actually can be flavoursome. And the standard joke is, what do you live on? Do you eat grass and what have you? And so this is a really lovely story among many of Billy retiring. So being an older person, and learning at that age, actually vegan food could be wonderful, and then promoting vegan food themselves. Next slide, please, Naomi. Again, we've got more food examples, and I must say these do look delicious. This is from Tessa, who we called her Tessa, and she ran a vegan bake sale. And what's interesting about this, she says the sale took place monthly in a secondhand shop. The experience taught me that people who want to take a stand against excessive consumerism by buying secondhand clothes tend to be more open about discussing the benefits of the vegan diet. I had a lot of interesting conversations and inspiring encounters thanks to this project. And these are her apple roses cakes. And again, it's another move to try and tie, I suppose, some small acts of pleasure with a deeper political analysis, in this case, tying veganism and anti-consumerism. Thanks. So Sonia here, now we're moving into some of the implicit criticism and hostility you can get from being vegan. I think most vegans will say that there've been times where people at the very least roll their eyes or make it obvious that it's very difficult to deal with vegans. What will we feed you? And even just sitting in a room as a vegan and not saying anything can generate some discomfort in people who may be challenged to think about their own consumption. So in Sonia says here we see some pushing back. I get upset when people are snarky or downright rude about veganism. This is Monica talking, and she's having a lovely day. You'll see in the photograph, so it's the images and the text are obviously accompanying each other. They're not sort of random images. And so there she is. She's having a nice day, presumably in a backyard. And there's this passing around of meat. And for her, it's a form of symbolic violence because it's an embodied form of slaughter. And, you know, and the dilemma is, and this is often a very gendered experience, do I say something or do I keep the peace? And if I don't say anything, am I complicit or am I somehow colluding with this system? But if I do say something, am I being antagonistic or, quote, spoiling the barbecue? Which actually Nick and I have written about. This is another interesting pairing of, in this instance, feminist politics and animal rights. And you'll see in the image, if you focus on the image, the kind of ways that human women's bodies can be equated with the bodies of animals, because, you know, in that dichotomy, often what we'll see is that men are understood to be associated with reason in their mind and women with our bodies and our emotions. Next slide, please, Naomi. So this is a story from Sally, and again, there's some gender politics here of a man lying in a field of chickens, and Sally tells the story of being angry about the kind of normative way that this naturalises the mistreatment of chickens. And what she says, if you move your eye down to the fourth paragraph, I realise a lot of meat-eating viewers will find this ad funny. And so what she's describing is the way that the slaughter of animals is often laughed off or seen as just something that's dismissed as with any sort of seriousness that we shouldn't be concerned with. It's a very powerful device, by the way. There are some other stories that were quite lovely, connections to community, support from others, again, not necessarily vegans themselves, who were showing support of vegans and how important this was. This was a story from Sonia about her workmates about not having very much money and people coming along and providing some ingredients and things for her, and it's a picture of her fridge. Here's a similar one from Emily. She talks about making all these whole food, plant-based recipes now and sharing them with a student that she was studying with. The next one, please. Again, we see here in this from Tracy, this is a story, again, gendered, is the act of trying to persuade non-vegans to accept vegans through food and through vegan food being shared. It's a very powerful move to break bread together, but it's very interesting that there's what our data was showing is quite a lot of effort on vegans' part to try and maybe diffuse any view that, oh no, we're going to be agitated and hostile. So is that the end of the presentation? We had many more examples, and some of those examples we'll share at another point when we release some findings. I thought we could just open it up now to discussion, if that's okay. Okay, well, firstly, I'll open it to Rachel, who's a vegan, and then on to Kayla. And if you could respond to the question about how you've experienced being vegan, what it means to you to be an ally to both animals and to other vegans and people who are supportive of vegans.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a big, intense question, I have to say. I feel like veganism at this part of my life, I mean, it's on and off 15 years almost of my life, that it's so intricately part of me at this point. For me, it's just, it's not doing harm, and it is like that love and that empathy, and kind of expanding my bubble of love and empathy to include like those non-human animals, and also things like trees and plants and stuff like that, and trying to live my life in a really like flat, horizontal, hierarchical manner means obviously acknowledging the fact that I should be no more powerful or no more important than a pig or a cow or whatever. So for me, it's been a process of coming to that and trying to live my life as best as possible in that manner. And along the way, trying to fold in as many people into that understanding and way of life as well. And if they don't, and try to at least make them ensure that they're respectful and not hostile. So yeah, I'm not too sure if that answers your question, but
it does. It's quite a profoundly different way of viewing life as to that what we're taught, isn't it? That we're taught to accept hierarchy and competition, and that of course we're more important. So the idea of you, that's deep thought there to contemplate. Why would my life be more important than a dog, a pig, or a cow? And for some people who might even be listening to this, you might go, "Oh, cut it out! Oh, what a load of rubbish!" And that's the hostility of carnism right there. If you're thinking about that, I want you to just stop and have a little think about why are you so defensive? And I think, Rachel, you're picking up on the kind of connections that you try to have, and the do no harm, and we do harm by virtue, I step on ants by accident or what have you, but it's trying to do the least amount of harm. Thank you. Kayla?
Yeah, so I have to admit, I have a bit of a public health background. So when I came to my journey of veganism, it was purely about me. It was about what can I do to protect my body. But since then, it's just had this massive transition where that's probably like the last of my priorities now. It's 100% for animals. It's 100% to stop that oppression. And I think like going through that journey myself makes me understand why other people do react the way they do, sorry. It's hard to come to that realization that something you've been doing for so long just completely does not align with your values, I think. And you get those remarks of, "Oh, but so you don't even eat fish, or you don't even eat chicken," and it's like, well, what's the difference between a fish or a chicken and a cow? Like, what makes one okay to eat and slaughter, but not the other? And I try to bring it up and make people aware of that, and what's the difference between that pet that you love so much and the ones that are sent to the slaughterhouse? And it's just something that either people aren't ready to admit to themselves, or they just haven't got to that point yet. But in saying that, I also have plenty of people in my life who are 100% supportive, and they love coming and trying vegan food with me, finding new cafes, and it's maybe even opened their eyes. And the amount of people in my life that have since gone vegan after me, I think that's just incredible. It just spreads. So that's
wonderful. They're beautiful stories to hear, Kayla. And thank you for your honesty around saying that you started through the food and diet, through nutrition idea, which is very interesting too, because sometimes the assumption is that a vegan diet is very unnutritious or unhealthy. And of course, like any diet, it can be unhealthy if you live on hot chips and rebel whoppers, or whatever they're called, hungry jacks. And also very interesting to see the shift in, as presumably your information about veganism and animal slaughter and animal processing grew, that so did your attachment to protecting animal rights, or being interested in them. But it's also really lovely to hear that you've got such a group of supporters around you, and that's opened their eyes. Because most of us weren't always vegan. In fact, I came at it quite late. So you're right to point out that it is hard to challenge what's normative.
I think a lot of our participants picked up on this and on what you're saying. You know, I was reading stories about people saying that after going vegan, their relationships with animals changed, because they started to see them as individuals, they started to see them as sentient beings, and so they saw them very differently, and they didn't have that guilt, that cringe when they started to think about them like that, which allowed them to. And the other thing I thought that was interesting was, you know, you talked about starting with food, but a lot of our entries make it really clear that food is kind of an outreach for them to do a form of allyship for animals. One person talked about it being a less antagonistic form of activism for them. And another one talked about kind of food for carnists as outreach, you know, showing that a vegan life is perfectly healthy, happy, fine, or that we're not missing out on things, that actually we're better off and we're happier and healthier, both physically and mentally, because our actions are in line with our values. So it was really interesting to see, you know, that you've kind of gone through a lot of the things that our participants have as well.
This might be a great opportunity for you to just say a few words about your project.
Yeah, I'd love to. I was actually just thinking, I think the whole topic of veganism really flirts the line between public health and social work. It's an issue for both. So what I'm interested in, I guess, is vegan parenting, which I think has even more social stigma and social pressure than just being a vegan yourself. You hear all the time, it's this big decision of, you know, does the vegan parent make the choice to also raise their child vegan, or do they not? And a lot of the arguments that come up, you know, some people are 100% confident, yes, my child will be vegan just like me, or the other half are kind of like, oh, well, I don't know if, you know, we can make that choice for them. But it's just interesting because parents make choices for their children about everything. So I guess for people who are so educated about the benefits of veganism and, you know, have all these values and morals surrounding it, do you put that aside to conform to what society want you to do, or do you just accept that you're probably going to cop some slack about it? And I think it's never really about the child's choice. It's about that decision of whether, you know, it's a fear of judgment. So do you create some tension with your family and the people around you, and in the process stick to your own values, or do you put those to the side and continue feeding your child meat and dairy and that? And so my research is actually interested in the role that health professionals play with that. And when vegan parents seek health advice about raising their child vegan, how is it that health professionals respond? And the reason I'm interested in this is because it kind of has two effects. One is that immediate, does the parent decide to raise a child vegan or not? Because health professionals have such an influence over everything you do medically, I guess. But the other influence is that health professionals can actually maintain that idea around whether it's safe or not. And we know that it's safe. The guidelines tell us it's safe. There's a body of research that says, you know, as long as it's well planned, which any diet should be, it's safe. So I guess I'm interested in how health professionals respond to that, because again, it would be kind of challenging their own ideals and their own behavior to even think about raising children vegan.
And there's no way to get away from it. That's the issue. You know, there's no escape. This is what I find. I went for a long walk with my dogs this morning. We drove out through the country, and it's full of cows, and they're all in fields separated from their calves. And the cows are tiny, so tiny I had to look twice at some of them because I thought they couldn't possibly be cows. And I know they've all been corralled to be put on a truck later today to be taken to slaughter. And you've got this constant war of how gorgeous is it to see these animals and how terrible is it to know the outcome. So, and there is no escape. You can't get away from it. I struggle with people who are very keen on intersectional analyses and who are very aware of power, but won't go that one step further, or in fact will contort themselves in many millions of ways to avoid it. I also find that I struggle with people who are avowedly feminist, which tends to be my circle, who, when you bring up the feminist aspect of animal abuse, usually have the answer of humans are more important and we don't have enough time or enough resources or whatever, and they can't see the intersecting aspects, but at the same time they're using those kind of theories in their work. I agree that is challenging, shall we say.
Some of the what we're seeing in this conversation itself is the movement between acts of kindness and connection and so forth, and also distress and trauma and rage that can come from witnessing that. And as a vegan, if you're as opposed to being just specifically plant-based, if you're vegan, then that affinity with animals, your country drive is going to change. What used to be, you just gaze out and think, oh, that's so sweet, moves into, oh, they're meat animals. That's what's going to happen to those animals. So let's throw it now to a couple of our vegan allies who've come today, and we really we appreciate you coming, because it's not an easy gig to sit here in a vegan session, and for us also to be expressing some of the frustration we have with people. So what I might do is I might just start with Judy, and maybe you could just give a quick sort of summary of why you're interested in being a vegan ally. Why is it important to you?
I think that important for me because a few family members, they are decided to be vegans, and they recently just share their feelings when they prepare the vegan foods or eat out with their friends. They feel struggle, and also when they transition to be the vegan, they feel challenged in when they're eating out or something. Yeah, like that made me reflect that how difficult they feel, and also think about how can I support them. Yeah, so I think this is the reason what I think is important for that.
Thank you. That's really, it's a very caring demonstration of love, rather than just saying to a family member that they love you, is to actually demonstrate that you love and that you support what they're trying to do, and appreciating that the problem isn't them being vegan, it's that there's restaurants and there aren't enough that are plant-based, or there aren't enough vegan options at the very least. So and I certainly appreciate my partner and other family members who do exactly what you're talking about, who look out for me, who, for instance, don't order duck when I'm sharing a meal with them. Even some small things like that, it's just a little courtesy that shows that they're thinking, oh, this might be hard for her. And in doing so, I think sometimes it makes it a little bit more hard for the person who otherwise is eating the duck, which is kind of the message. If I can throw to you now, Shirley, and say to you, what is it that what makes you want to be a vegan ally?
Because I have a lot of friends who are vegan. They are so amazing, and they are really positive and active, and they care about others. So I feel like, because I used to be a temporarily vegan for a month, as I told you before, and I feel like I was so calm, and I feel really light of my body, and I know a lot of benefits of being a vegan, but I couldn't become a vegan because of some reasons. It's really hard for me and it needs time, I know. So I would like to be a vegan ally because I would like to be one of them one day. But I want to support them for now as much as I can. Even I was allergic to today, and I think maybe I have to change my diet so that I couldn't be allergic to something. So I think it's really good opportunity to be a part of Vegan Ally and to support them and maybe help myself to be a vegan in one day someday. Yeah.
And thank you for your honesty and your candor in that, because it really can be a process, and people talk about transitioning, and I really appreciated you talking about that time you spent as a vegan, that many friends are, that you felt lighter in your body, that you admire and respect those vegans and want to support them and care about them. And that maybe one day that, you know, that's the path that you'd like to investigate. And even the thought process of having allergies, is this connected to my diet? I certainly found my allergies have vastly improved since cutting out dairy. And that was a lovely little benefit of becoming vegan that I didn't anticipate, that the hives and the swelling and so forth. So I think that's, we really appreciate your allyship because it means a lot, and your openness to exploring veganism. I'll just throw it open now to anyone before any final comments, and Naomi might want to close.
I will just pick up on something. I would say that what you both identified there at the end came through in our participants' entries as well. You know, there was an awful lot from our participants talking about how much it matters to them to have the support of family members and friends who will go to vegan places with them, or who will put them first in terms of thinking it through. And conversely, there were some entries that talked about how difficult it is navigating families where that support is not there, and how much, and I know from other groups that I'm involved in, how much anguish that actually causes between family and friends. So I think that form of allyship is incredibly important that you both identify.